In the calm breath of early morning, when pale light slid across the quiet roofs of old Japanese estates, the concept of mercy revealed itself not as a fragile sentiment, but as the inner axis around which the entire moral worldview of the archipelago revolved. A man observing those first rays would see how slowly and inevitably they overtook the darkness, not by force, but by the quiet inevitability that comes only to something truly powerful. So it was with mercy in the Japanese tradition. To the untrained mind, it seemed soft, but to the wise, it appeared as the highest discipline, a victory of spirit over impulse. Confucius wrote that only the one who embodies Ren, the compassionate virtue, can be called a true ruler, and later Mencius repeated that mercy is not an accessory of the throne, but its foundation, without which power rots from within and slips into tyranny. In feudal Japan, surrounded by warlords, shifting loyalties, and the constant shadow of conflict, mercy became not a decoration of statehood, but its lifeline, an invisible thread preventing the cruelty of the battlefield from becoming the cruelty of everyday rule. A samurai lord who knew how to restrain vengeance, who could see the suffering of others even while holding absolute authority, was believed to be a man whose heart had learned to command itself before commanding others. And in that inner mastery lay something far more formidable than any army, for mercy was a controlled flame that tempered the warrior's soul without extinguishing it. In this idea lived a subtle warning known to every ruler. The blade of authority cuts clean only when guided by compassion. Without it, it becomes a weapon turned against the society it claims to protect. That is why chroniclers describe moments when a single merciful gesture prevented entire provinces from drowning in blood, as if the land itself bowed to rulers who understood the weight of restraint. The samurai knew that victory on the battlefield meant little if the land afterward was filled with orphan children and starving peasants who feared their own leaders more than the enemy. Thus, mercy was not a philosophical ornament, but a strategic necessity, a wisdom older than any sword school. And yet, behind this serene logic grew an even deeper truth, one that future generations of warriors would carry within them like a quiet heartbeat, a truth that begins to reveal itself only when power, responsibility, and human fragility intertwine in ways no chronicler could fully anticipate. The landscape of feudal Japan unfolded like a vast tapestry, woven from rice fields, mountain passes, and fortified castle towns. Yet beneath that calm surface pulsed a system of governance where every gesture of power carried both danger and promise. A thoughtful observer wandering through a daimyo's estate would notice how authority revealed itself not in the clang of armor or the sharp cries of soldiers, but in the quiet manner with which a ruler listened to petitions, measured disputes, and walked among his people with slow, deliberate steps. Unlike many Western monarchs, whose dominion was often justified through divine decree and sustained by fear, Japanese leaders were taught that power was not a right granted to an individual, but a burden bestowed by heaven, a weight that demanded humility, restraint, and a constant awareness of the fragile lives beneath their protection. Schools of philosophy repeated that the ruler existed not above the people but for them, as a gardener tending a living field whose vitality depended on his wisdom and mercy. Among the brightest embodiments of this ideal stood Prince Yozen of Yonezawa, a man remembered not for extravagant displays of authority, but for his insistence that the monarch should be the first servant of the state. His reign unfolded during an era when famine pressed upon the land and economic hardship threatened to fracture his domain. Yet he refused to indulge in the aloofness of rank. Instead, he simplified his own life, reduced the burdens placed upon his subjects, and taught that a leader who ruled through fear would command only trembling obedience, while one who ruled with kindness would receive loyalty that no sword could force. Under his guidance, the people gradually transformed from a taxed multitude into a community bound by mutual respect, drawn to their lord not because they feared punishment, but because they recognized the sincerity of his heart. This model of paternal governance created a rhythm of life in which authority resembled a shelter rather than a whip. Samurai retainers, trained to maintain discipline, also learned to cultivate empathy, for their duty extended beyond securing borders to ensuring that their province lived in harmony with itself. The balance between power and mercy became a quiet force shaping the lives of farmers, artisans, and merchants, who sensed in their rulers not distant overlords, but guardians capable of seeing their needs. It was a fragile equilibrium that required tremendous inner discipline, for a single instance of cruelty from a leader could shatter years of trust. Yet when upheld, it created a realm where obedience came not from compulsion, but from devotion. As seasons turned and political tides shifted, this philosophy stood like a lantern guiding those who held authority, reminding them that true power flowed from integrity, not intimidation. Yet within this gentle model lurked a tension that every warrior eventually confronted, a question that stretched far beyond the palace walls and echoed through the training yards of countless samurai clans, a question about the nature of strength itself, and what a warrior must possess in his heart before he can truly wield a sword. When a samurai stepped onto the training grounds at dawn, the world around him stirred with the layered silence of a culture that understood battle not as savagery, but as a disciplined dialogue between life and death. The clang of steel meeting wooden posts, the rhythmic breathing of warriors rehearsing ancient forms, and the distant rustle of wind moving through pine branches created an atmosphere where strength and serenity intertwined. Within this austere environment, every young samurai learned a principle older than any sword school, a teaching passed down through generations like a sacred whisper. Bushi no nasake, the gentleness of the warrior. It was a concept that told him his worth lay not merely in the force of his strike, but in the depth of his ability to restrain it. True mastery demanded the capacity to see the suffering of another human being, even in the heat of combat. For a warrior without compassion became not a protector of the realm, but a storm that destroyed all in its path. This ideal was embodied in the tale of Kumagae Naozane, a seasoned warrior known for skill and courage. On a mist-covered battlefield, he encountered a young enemy, barely more than a boy, whose trembling hands revealed the terror of facing death for the first time. The moment stretched as if time itself hesitated, and Kumagae, seeing not a foe but a child caught in the machinery of war, felt the weight of the decision pressed upon him. He could have taken the life before him and secured another victory for his lord, yet something deeper stirred within him, a recognition that honor was not measured solely by the number of enemies defeated, but by the integrity with which one faced the world's cruelty. He spared the youth, and in doing so discovered that mercy could carve a more enduring mark upon the soul than any triumph on the battlefield. This encounter haunted him, reshaped him, and ultimately led him toward a path of spiritual reflection, showing generations of warriors that compassion was not weakness, but a rare form of courage. Yet the paradox of the samurai lay precisely there. He was expected to be ruthless when duty required, his blade an extension of the law and the defense of his clan. But the same heart that steadied his strike also held the ability to weep, to write poetry about the moon rising over quiet waters, to sense beauty in the fleeting world he might soon leave behind. Many warriors kept personal diaries filled with verses about falling blossoms or the sound of distant bells, gentle echoes of a humanity preserved even amid carnage. It was this inner balance that defined the true samurai, for without the capacity to feel deeply, he could not protect the fragile peace his sword existed to defend. Still, there remained a question at the core of this duality, one that haunted every warrior who had tasted battle. If compassion was essential, How could it be cultivated in a life where violence was always one command away? And where could a man find the discipline needed to keep his heart open in a world shaped by duty and conflict? The answer, as the generations would learn, lay not in the battlefield itself, but in the subtle realms of art, music, and spiritual practice that awaited those willing to seek them. In the quieter corners of feudal Japan, far from the clang of armor and the harsh cries of battlefield commands, there existed sanctuaries where a samurai's soul was shaped with the same care as his blade. A man observing a training hall in the domain of Satsuma would notice that the lessons offered there extended far beyond martial drills. Between the rigorous sessions of swordsmanship, young warriors were guided toward instruments, brushes, and scrolls, their hands shifting from hardened grips on weapon hilts to the delicate touch needed to pluck the strings of the biwa or inscribe flowing characters onto rice paper. The biwa's melancholic echo filled the wooden rooms with a kind of disciplined tenderness, its tones reminding students that beneath the armor and stern posture lay a human heart capable of breaking, healing, and perceiving the weight of suffering in others. These artistic practices were never treated as optional embellishments to martial life. They were considered essential, for a warrior who understood beauty could not become a brute. The samurai wrote poems about transient blossoms, played melodies inspired by mountain winds, and painted landscapes steeped in solitude. In these acts, they found a spiritual counterbalance to violence, a way of ensuring that the power they possessed did not devour the gentleness within them. Even the sternest instructors encouraged this expression, knowing that harmony between strength and compassion formed the core of a warrior's moral equilibrium. Without such nurturing, a samurai risked becoming an instrument of destruction rather than a guardian of peace. At night, long after the lamps in the training halls flickered low, warriors often gathered in small circles to recite poems or reflect on the subtle emotions awakened by a brief brushstroke or a haunting musical phrase. These gatherings did not soften them into weakness. Rather, they deepened their awareness of life's fragile beauty, teaching them that the world they defended was worth more than conquest or victory. By learning to feel, they learned to protect. The ability to sense another's pain became as vital as the ability to read an opponent's stance, and many believed that only a man who understood sorrow could wield his sword with justice. Still, the question remained, if the arts nourished the heart, what shaped the outward expression of this inner compassion? How did a warrior carry his cultivated gentleness into daily life, into conversation, into the smallest gestures that defined his relationship with others? The answer, rooted deeply in centuries of tradition, emerged through one of the most refined practices of Japanese culture, a discipline of conduct that transformed every movement into a quiet declaration of respect. Across the refined corridors of old Japanese estates, where sliding doors opened onto stone gardens and the murmuring of water lent shape to silence, politeness emerged not as a set of rehearsed gestures, but as the living language of respect. A man walking through such a place would observe how every movement, every bow, every pause between spoken words carried the weight of intention. It was here that the teachings of the Ogasawara school, an ancient institution devoted to the cultivation of etiquette, rooted themselves in the hearts of warriors. These teachings insisted that true politeness was not a mask of social obligation, but a delicate harmony between body, mind, and the surrounding world. For a samurai, the grace with which he poured tea or greeted a guest reflected the same discipline that guided his hand in battle, for both required unwavering focus and clarity of spirit. This philosophy found its most eloquent expression in the tea ceremony, the quiet ritual known as chano-yu. Far from being a simple pastime, it embodied centuries of spiritual practice, demanding from participants a stillness of mind that mirrored the serene rhythm of nature itself. The man who entered the tea hut stepped into a realm stripped of rank and status. Even the proudest warrior bowed low as he passed through the small entrance, symbolically leaving behind the world of conflict and ambition. Inside, the faint aroma of heated water mingled with the soft music of the kettle, and every gesture, from the placement of the utensils to the slow turning of the tea bowl, served as a meditation on humility and gratitude. Through this ritual, the samurai learned that politeness was not an ornate facade, but a reflection of one's inner state, a way of acknowledging the fragile dignity of every human being. This reverence for manners extended into daily life. A samurai avoided sudden movements, spoke with measured breath, and listened more than he spoke. He understood that each gesture was a thread woven into the tapestry of human connection, capable of fostering harmony or fracturing it. In times of tension, a calm bow could dissolve conflict. In moments of fear, a gentle word could restore courage. Thus, politeness became a subtle force binding communities, shaping the rhythm of life in towns and villages. It was the outward embodiment of compassion, a visible sign that a warrior's strength did not exclude tenderness, but was made complete by it. Yet beneath this polished conduct lived a deeper truth that had accompanied the samurai throughout centuries. Politeness alone could not define a warrior if mercy did not dwell in his heart. For the virtues of courtesy and compassion, when joined, created a moral power stronger than any sword stroke. And as this union took shape, it revealed the final dimension of the samurai path, a revelation that stood at the threshold of every warrior's destiny, waiting to show that gentleness and steel were not opposites, but reflections of the same unwavering spirit. When a samurai reached the later years of his life, he often found himself standing upon a quiet hill at dusk, gazing over the land he had spent a lifetime defending. From such a height, the valleys below did not appear as battlefields or territories of conquest, but as living spaces filled with families, fields, shrines, and narrow, winding paths where ordinary people carried on their fragile daily existence. A man observing such a scene understood that the essence of the warrior's journey did not lie in the victories he carved into the chronicles, or the battles he endured with unyielding resolve, but in the moral qualities that shaped every decision he made, both on and off the field. Mercy and politeness, virtues often underestimated by those who saw strength only in force, became the quiet pillars upon which a samurai's legacy stood. Without them, courage dissolved into recklessness and discipline hardened into cruelty. With them, strength transformed into protection and authority grew into guidance. In the dimming light, as cicadas offered their final songs to the falling day, a samurai reflected on how mercy had safeguarded him from becoming a slave to anger. He remembered moments when a restrained hand had prevented unnecessary suffering, when showing humanity had preserved not only another's life, but his own integrity. He knew that mercy demanded more bravery than any charge across a battlefield, because it required confronting one's own impulses and choosing a higher path. And as he considered the many faces of politeness he had practiced, bows offered to rivals, carefully chosen words that diffused tension, gestures that conveyed respect even in disagreement, he recognized that courtesy had never been emptiness or social obligation. It had been a discipline of the spirit, proof that a warrior could carry serenity into the most turbulent moments, shaping the world around him not through dominance, but through harmony. The moral fabric of Japan was woven from these qualities. Artists, monks, and scholars recorded tales of warriors who tempered their steel with compassion and their authority with humility, leaving behind a cultural inheritance that influenced poetry, theater, ethics, and even political philosophy. In villages, children grew up hearing stories of samurai who protected the weak and negotiated peace with dignity. In cities, merchants and artisans modeled their conduct on the etiquette born of warrior tradition. Mercy and politeness became more than personal virtues. They became the unspoken code of a society striving to live in balance despite the storms of history. As twilight deepened, a samurai's silhouette blended with the horizon, his figure neither fierce nor imposing, but calm, resolute, and quietly human. His sword, sheathed at his side, gleamed faintly in the fading light, no longer a symbol of dominance, but a reminder of the inner strength required to choose forgiveness over vengeance,
respect over pride. And in that moment, the final truth revealed itself. The sword of a true warrior was not defined solely by its sharpness, but by the heart that wielded it, a heart capable of recognizing suffering, extending mercy, and honoring life with every gesture. Yet behind this serene revelation lingered one more question, echoing softly like a bell carried on the wind. If the samurai's greatest power lay not in force but in compassion, what might the world become if such a code were embraced beyond the boundaries of ancient Japan, reshaping not only warriors but all who sought courage rooted in humanity?